Hello everyone, Garagos here. Welcome back to the pit. Today, in this new episode of Bolt Action 101, where my goal is to try and give newer players some hints, some suggestions, some ideas about how to not to play the game in the sense that rules-wise, but just to give you an idea of the deeper level of the game. I mean, Bolt Action is a simple game. There are not many rules, and you can literally start playing within 50 minutes of someone telling you the base rules, the core rules. It's that easy. It's one of its strongest selling points, in my opinion, along with the mechanics that we touched upon that on another video. But despite being very simple to learn, I would dare as to say that it is hard to master. That is, there is a tactical depth in the game. Now, as all dice game, luck will always play a factor. But your choices do matter. Over the long term, if you make the correct tactical choices, more often than not, you will come out on top. Now, let me say this once again, and I really believe this. Winning is not the main point of the game, at least for me. The first and foremost, it's fundamental that the game turns out to be a good story that can be enjoyable by both parties. This said, it's also fun to try and beat your opponent, but with skill, etc. And so these are some suggestions. Already this preamble has taken way more time than I originally intended, so let's stick to the matter. Alright, so what are we talking about today? Today we are just scratching the surface of the concept about activation priority. This is, in my humble opinion, probably the single most important skill you as a new player should acquire. The basic gist goes like this. It's fundamental, it's very important to know your activation priorities, which means what do I do, what do I activate if I get the next dice from the bag. This is important, but also almost as important is the skill of being able to review your priorities based on how the situation evolves as the dice get pulled from the bag. I'm trying to give you now an example, a visual example, so let's just drive straight. I'm going to use Tabletop Simulator as a visual aid on the subject matter. Now, keep in mind that this board here I did not create myself. I found it actually online, so it won't be perfect, but again, it's just to give you an idea. This scenario, actually, they are not full armies involved, is just a selection. Again, I'm just trying to make a point. But these examples come from a recent game I've had with a friend of mine, Nikki. We were playing the English They were played by my friend Mickey, while I was playing the Germans. Now, we were actually playing in North Africa. This is clearly not North Africa, but again, don't mind the setting, mind the words. Again, let's go very, very briefly over what is what. For the English, we have a medium mortar here, which for the purpose of this video is targeting this MMG and is currently hitting on a 2+ because it has successfully ranged in but hasn't called any casualties. Okay, now imagine there is a spotter somewhere so that he has line of sight. So we have one mortar. Then we have two teams of veteran infantrymen. They are just veteran troops. There's like 3, 6, 9, 10 in one team and 10 in the other team as well. They are just normal veteran riflemen. Then we have an anti-tank team. And finally, we have an SAS squad currently of 6 men. Okay, these are the English troops. On the German side, we have 2 regular here infantry squads. They both have an LMG, and the rest is rifles. One of them has 2 pin markers. Then we have a regular MMG that we saw before. And finally, we have one command squad. We have a sergeant with an officer, a platoon commander with an SMG, and 2 fellow riflemen. And we have another regular here infantry squad. Again, they have an LMG. It doesn't really matter what turn it is. Imagine it's turn 3 or 4, whatever. It's not important. So, what's important? What are priorities? Now, this was also, by the way, an objective-based game. Again, imagine that just for the purpose of this this scenario, we have like one objective around here and one objective around here. In actual gameplay, this was not a house; it was a batch of difficult terrain. If that helps you visualize. So, let's play the game. So, if the German draw the first dice, what are their options? What are their priorities? If we select this squad, we can now imagine for the purpose of this scenario that this mortar is just way out of line of sight. Let's put it right here so you can't shoot it from here. This team could shoot at these veterans right here in the open. Okay, we could activate this unit. They have more options. They can shoot at these guys, or they can shoot at these guys. Once again, imagine that this squad isn't in line of sight. Play pretend. But moving these, activating this as first team isn't a great idea. Why? It has 2 pins. They are regular, so base leadership of 9. minus, minus 2 pins, they activate on a 7 or less. Now, that's more than 50% of the time, should be like 56%. But unless you roll a double 1, you shoot with a -1 to hit, and most importantly, if you fail your activation check, you wasted their activation. True, they might get pinned more if you activate later, but still, it's a risky proposition, in my opinion. Or you have the MMG. The MMG is under mortar fire, so it's quite likely to be killed, even one shot, if the mortar hand lands true. So you might also say, well, before losing it, for example, I can take a shot at this anti-tank team right here. I do have a not insignificant chance to wipe it out outright. And again, if I delay the activation of the MMG, then I risk losing the order dice. This makes more sense, in my opinion. Or finally, we have this very, very dangerous unit. They are SAS, so super veteran, all with SMG. They can lay down a withering amount of fire. So another option is, for example, to do a snap to action. Because again, please try imagine that these are within 6 inches. These, if you prefer. If we double activate, we can, for example, move our officer. Like, again, imagine this is a bunch of rough ground. We can move inside the rough ground, get in a defensive position, and then shoot and put one first pin, then move forward, or even stay put with the grenadiers here and put at least 2 pins on the unit, possibly killing a couple while they are out there in the open. And again, this is pretty sensible in my opinion. So what would I do in this instance if I had the first dice? Actually, my plan was to go for the snap to action. I really wanted to take care of these SAS, because otherwise they would risk running amok this flank and secure this objective. I was willing, very much willing, to sacrifice the MMG, risking the first shot by the mortar. I wasn't willing at all to use my first activation on the pinned here grenadiers, and it was less of a priority to activate this team. After all, both of the teams were into heavy cover, and so that would make more sense to me to focus on weakening this unit. But once again, is there a right and a wrong way to do things? It's debatable. Now, I do think that risking the first dice on this activation is too dangerous for the advantage it could bring me. Again, you could say that if, but now we are starting to put one if, we are stacking them one onto each other. If we activate and if we shoot at the anti-tank team, and if we manage to kill it, now we basically removed 1 dice each from the dice bag. And so we are in the same situation as before, only the enemy is down and order dies. So even if we lose one, it's just a trade, basically. The problem with activating the MMG first, though, is that this activation doesn't help me win the game. Again, please keep in mind that the distances are different than they were in the actual game. I realize that this might make it more difficult to follow what I'm saying, but please try to get the idea behind it. So, getting this kill, this is not a kill point scenario. It doesn't further my position, so I wouldn't want it to be the first activation. Well, this, to me, of the three, let's call it sub-theaters in this particular instance, I think this is the most important scenario, because otherwise, if he acts first and activates these, my officer are almost surely dead. Then my flank is weakened because I'm not sure if my grenadier team can take on an SAS veteran team. On this side, even if the enemy chooses to activate first one of these units, okay, I can deal with it. Again, if they decide to charge, I am behind I am in a defensive position, so I get to strike first. Again, also keep in mind that this was before the leaks about the English special rules, so we didn't know that they could have extra dice when attacking, etc. And in any case, assaulting a defensive position is always a risky endeavor. So I'm also willing to bet that this isn't the first option for the English as well. As it turns out, it is the English that draw the first die of the turn. And what do? They activate their SAS. They get within the rough ground that is here, and they wipe out the squad. Completely dead, one shot. No point in going down because they get within super close distance. So they just stand no chance. There are three regular dudes standing there in the open. They are mercilessly gunned down by SMG fire. So the first die is gone. The first dice is gone for the English. Now, as my situation changed. Yes, for example, now, after they have activated, I no longer care about these guys. Okay? I can literally wait until I pick the very last dice in my bag before I use this. Why? Because the only enemy in, let's call it engagement range, if you wish, they have already acted. Okay, so these that were like the first team I would have used had I picked the first dice, activated with a snap to, but regardless, they would have been my number one priority, so to speak. Once the enemy has moved, they are completely useless to me, uninteresting. I can now focus on other parts of the battlefield. Then again, I pick the next dice, okay? Now, what are my options? Once again, my officer is dead. V squad, I'm not interested. killing this anti-tank team, as we said before, isn't particularly interesting to me. So what do? I open fire, I literally fire with these guys upon these guys that are standing there in the open. And I kill I think I killed like 4, but again, it's not very, very important. Now they are pinned, they lost a bunch of dudes. But also, this put the, again, this changes the English plan. Now for the dice, once again, the English have an interesting shot on the MMG. Of course, for example, it's more important for the Englishmen to just try and wipe out the MMG rather than using this anti-tank team, for example. If we wanna, let's do the exercise, let's do things this way. In this situation, what would you do with your first dice? Once again, I think the number one mistake would be to move this anti-tank team. Because it cannot do anything that is really, really impactful on the game, rather than maybe going for more cover. Or, yeah, they can shoot, they can take a fire order, but yeah, possibly pin the MMG. But I think it's way, way more juicy to move the other guys. And once again, because remember, we are speaking about order's priority, not discussing the game itself. This can be seen from the English perspective as well. Now, assume that the Germans pick the first dice. So they snap to action. They do other stuff. They kill whatever amount of SAS. Now, let's assume that there is at least one SAS alive at the end of this shooting. Now, as per the Germans, I, as the English player, I am no longer interested in activating these guys. They can wait, and they will wait until the last turn, the last dice of the turn, because they have nothing that they face can be active upon them. Or we could try and wipe out the MMG. That's a legit target. Or we can try and deal with these two squads. Now, this squad, for example, has already 2 pins. Now, an enemy with 2 pins is an enemy that might fail their activation, which is super for me, and it's an enemy unit that even if they pass their, let's assume they pass their order check. Now, when I try to strategize, I always assume that the enemy is going to pass their order test most of the time, unless they are testing on a 3 or a 4. Then I assume they fail, even if sometimes they still work. But on average, on a 7, I am assuming they pass the check. So let's assume they pass the check. With 2 pins, again, unless they roll a double 1, they will still have 1 pin, so they will still fire at reduced accuracy. Okay, so there is really no point, usually, again, I'm speaking broadly. Keep in mind that every game, every situation is different. Again, I'm just trying to give you an idea of how I reason. I wouldn't activate this, because even if I put a third pin on the unit, yes, it's more likely that they fail their order, but the difference between 2 pins and 3 pins, in my opinion, doesn't warrant a shoot. For example, I would rather, if possible, for example, move this a little bit into cover or something, and then shoot at this unit, because if the enemy has 2 pinned units, the enemy has 2 chances of failing their activation. Remember the golden rule: the more dice you roll, the more failures you will eventually get, and so on and so on. Now, just for fun, in this case, I think I got like 4 activations in a row, so I was able to basically, despite losing the first dice, or losing an order dice here, I was basically able to do the rest of the turn in the under the best possible conditions for my army. But again, this was not the point of the video. Again, the point of the video is making decisions in the correct order does matter, as does matter the skill of changing your priorities mid-turn. Again, I think the most interesting example is this situation here. So both teams are interested in getting the first dice, because getting the first dice might mean, for example, trying to completely wipe out one enemy team with superior firepower. But once the first die is drawn, if the first die goes either to the SAS, in this case, or to the German snap to action here, priorities immediately change. Activating the surviving unit, assuming there's one, of course, drops in priority. So the advice here is go in battle with a plan, but always be ready to adapt it and change it. So even if the plan, so you must have the cool, okay, to adapt your plan. Again, for example, you're playing as a German, you lost the first dice, you lost a unit here. It doesn't matter. This unit has priority 0. Okay? All the other units become more and more important. Then the reasoning remains: activating a unit with pin, with no commander, maybe it's still worth it to use it later in the turn. Maybe if we can rally as last action of the game, we have a fresh unit, unless we feel like we are forced to do something before we get destroyed. Or we can move the MMG if we think it's most important to try and get the mortar away from our side. Then again, we might want to intentionally sacrifice, or possibly sacrifice, an MMG, because remember, even if the mortar is hitting on a 2+, there is still a 1 in 6 chance that the shot misses completely. Then there's a chance that they actually fail to wound your models. And then, assuming there's at least one survivor, there's still the chance that you pass your morale check, and thus the unit is still alive. Again, a lot depends on context. In the context of an objective-based game, where the objective is nowhere close to the position of the MMG, it might be worth it to have the enemy use their mortars on your MMG rather than, for example, start to range in on one of your defensive units, because if I'm defending an objective here, I am not inclined to move my troops. And mortars love to shoot at enemies who are stationary, because the worst thing you can do with your mortars usually is fire at things that are on the move and that want to be actively on the move, because usually that means that you either roll a 6 or you waste your shots. You want to use your mortars, if possible, on stationary targets in order to have to force them to move, or to just make them deal with the aftermath, risking taking pins, casualties, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so this is it for now. I know maybe I was a little confusing. I apologize for this one, but I really wanted to give you an idea of what priorities can be during a game, and more importantly, on how you are supposed to continuously evaluate priorities during your turn. Because remember, Bolt Actions is not an I go, you go game like Warhammer 40k, for example, where we are free to meticulously plan your turn, with every unit trying to do their things. In Bolt Action, priorities change continuously. So, like a wise man said, you have to be like water. You have to flow, adapt, and possibly overcome. All right, please let me know what you think of this video. Has it been too confusing? Possibly. I'm willing to accept that, but I was curious to try and see if this setup is more helpful than not, because discussing it with just words would be even more complicated, and my drawing skills, I would have to do a paint diagram, which would probably be even more confusing. This said, I will see you in the next video, so thank you for the attention, be safe, and ciao ciao.